I'm Dr. Uche, a practicing physician who's been coaching others to write and publish their biographies since 2013. The first autobiographies I brought to publication were for my dad and granddad, and those took more than 5 years and lots of mistakes. On this channel, I will show you the tools I use to perfect the process so that you can have your biography done in 6 months or less without the delays and mistakes. Remember to subscribe and share with your friends. Let's dig in. Hello, friends. I am back, and today I'm gonna delve into some really interesting stuff. I am talking to those who are writing for older relatives. Over the next couple of weeks, I want to showcase a couple of things that are really interesting to ask and to document. In addition to everything else in this manual, I'm going to delve, particularly sort of zoom into a couple of questions. Are you ready? Stay tuned. So if you're writing for an older relative, there are a couple of things that are really interesting. And here I'm speaking as a child because I talk to my father and I know the sort of things I ask him, but I've also listened to my kids talk to their grandpa and ask him certain questions. And from listening to them, I've been able to sort of visualize what would be interesting to a kid. Okay, so that is really interesting because remember, you're writing for maybe a parent, but you're also writing the kind of stuff you want your children to read and to be interested in knowing sort of the facts in what you're writing. Okay, so it's really important to not only write what you want to know, but write what you think your child may want to know about that older relative. So a couple of things to zoom into that you may or may not have thought about. The first thing is just day-to-day life. Just ask that older relative. So you wake up in the morning and what did you do? Okay, you woke up, you would go, I don't know, clean up, do chores, get your water. Where did you get your water from? Yep, it's not automatic for some of us who have much older parents. It wasn't always that there was running water in the home, right? Where did you go to get it? Where did you go to play? What did you play with? What were your toys? My children asked my dad once, and he told them the sort of things he played with as a child growing up in southeastern Nigeria. My dad was a child mostly in the 50s. And so it was really fascinating for my kids to hear of the sort of things he knew growing up, which all turned out to be quite different from their experiences growing up at this time. The other thing you can ask about has to do with school. How was it going to school? How old did you have to be to start school? What sort of things did you learn at school? I find that really fascinating. My dad, again, as I said, who grew up in the 50s, told my children that when he was younger, in order for the adult to feel a child was old enough to go to school, the child had to extend their hand across and it had to touch the opposite ear. So that was really interesting. My kids were like, wow, yes, that's so different. But such novel, different things make for really interesting reading. And I think that reading about things outside of our lived experiences, your child reading about things outside of what they know, it does broaden the mind. Do you agree with me? I really think it broadens the mind. I purposefully take my kids outside of situations they're used to, just so they can experience something different, outside the country, a setting that's quite different from where they live in Colorado, because I think it's so important to try to experience as much of life as possible. Different settings, different people, different foods, right? Yes, we do go by that Ethiopian food. We do get the Chinese food. We do get Korean food. I think it really, really makes for a much more knowledgeable person. And so don't hesitate to bring out those things that are different. That's what makes this autobiography even more special for that older relative of yours. So we talked about day-to-day living, we talked about school experiences. The third would be world events. Make sure to ask your older relative about world events. What happened when they were growing up? Most people can remember a few really huge scale things that happened. My dad can remember the Americans landing on the moon. He tells me they were like, huh? Who on earth goes to the moon? Like the earth isn't enough for them? So it was really interesting, but he can remember that. Some people may remember pandemics. My grandfather, who died in 1986, wrote about the influenza pandemic. And I happen to have his biography. And you might know, if you've been following me, that his and my dad's were actually the first two I published. So I'm able to read where he wrote about the influenza, the great influenza pandemic, and being baptized around that time. So we can talk about the COVID pandemic. Our generation will talk about that, obviously. I will talk about the turn of the millennium. That was a big deal for me as a young adult. And there are very many other world events that you could ask your older relative. It could be geographical, it could be political, it could even be unpleasant things. There are wars, right? Wars happen, unfortunately. Did you live during this war, and do you remember when it ended? How did things pan out? My parents lived through the Biafran War, which was a civil war in Nigeria, 1967 to 1970, and that's something they talk about sometimes. So 3 things I've mentioned here, my friend: day-to-day life, school experiences, and world events. And that's the sort of thing you really want to capture in talking to an older relative who you're helping, I hope, write their autobiography. What do you think? I'm going to be sharing a few more aspects over the next few weeks, things you can ask an older relative, but I really would love to know what you think as well. So let me know in the comments, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.